Today I want to talk to you about another lesson in psychology. Just because of the recent support in the last video that I put out about psychology, I believe it was the Frankenstein syndrome, that went over pretty well. In fact, I actually enjoyed doing that one, just kind of troubleshooting it. So I'm going to try this again, people. Maybe you're going to like this new one. Now, this next one is called the Messiah complex, and also the Messiah complex trap. These are two psychology lessons that you're going to find interesting, people. Now, these are not strictly INFJ. These don't just affect INFJs. This is not specific to our personality type, as I tried to describe the other one, but this can affect any type. This is just something that I figure that, yeah, the INFJs like to talk about. We like psychology, and we're actually just, instinctive students of this. So here we go, people. So the Messiah complex typically is something that would actually favor the certain types of personalities. For example, let's say a narcissist or a sociopath type of personality, one that's already drawn toward, let's say, the aggrandizement, almost the authority role, having power over people in that way, having some kind of control over people in that way, or that are drawn to this. Now, I could see that this would be somebody that would be looking toward this kind of line of tyranny, as I guess you could say is what it turns into. So it usually starts when, let's say, somebody in a position of power. Now, this could be anybody. This could be somebody, for instance, of course, this could be a political figure. This could be a CEO and a boss, or things like that, in a corporation. This could even be a parent, or parents and things like this. This could be even teachers in schools and things like that. This could even be in domestic relationships. The same thing. The same kind of twisted Messiah complex will come out in almost every type of scale of human relationships. It can be at a large scale, or it can be even in smaller scales. But we're just going to go with this larger scales for right now. Typically, it starts when praise and admiration is added. If somebody reaches a situation in their life where they're starting to get praise and admiration, they're starting to get to a powerful position. Maybe they're making money. Maybe they yield power in a political situation over people. Well, of course, they're going to get praise and admiration. Now, depending on how they take this, depending on where their spirit is, where their soul lies, are they going to be benevolent, or are they going to be egotistical? Now, the egotistical mind is what ones fall into the Messiah complex. It's somebody that takes these praises and admiration in egotistical fashion. They're taking this praise, feeding their ego, believing what they're being told, feeding off what they're being told, feeding off the admiration, the gifts and things like that, the praise they may be seeing, is almost to them a form of worship. The way you'd worship let's say, God. Yeah, this is basically what it is. This Messiah complex basically is somebody playing God, and somebody taking on that role and actually believing it, and actually filling their soul with this idea that they've somehow become a god in the world. You can actually see this in a lot of different factions. Even rock stars, movie stars, Hollywood celebrities, some of them actually take the bait for this, and they do. They go into these type of things, and usually you can see how it becomes very dysfunctional in their lives when they take these kind of praises and admirations for their own, and they start to believe these things. So at this point here, the ego will feed the shadow functions, because at this point here, you are slipping into shadow functions. Anybody that's taking this kind of praise, anybody that's slipping into this Messiah complex is already out of their shadow function. They're into their shadow function. They've already slipped into those twisted, dark shadows that typically is going to lead them there. And because they're accepting the praise, so they've already flipped whatever it is that they had. They're starting to bend into their shadows, and they're living unhealthy. So so at that point there, the personality type would have to go into the shadows in order for this to work. because anytime you drift into the shadows, that's when you become unhealthy. And this is obviously a very unhealthy complex at this point here. Okay, so yes, so the ego becomes feeds the shadow functions, as I said. So the praise and admiration start to go, basically it goes to their head, goes to their whole psyche, and they stop believing that they're bigger than they really are. They start to feel powerful. They start to feel mighty, and they start slipping into the shadow functions, as I said, and the ego starts becoming basically engorged, in a sense. So, all right, and at this point here, the next steps are delusions of grandeur. Basically that's basically what it all leads to. All of a sudden, this subject becomes exactly that, delusional. And they start believing everything that they are. They start to actually hear the praise, hear the admiration, and it turns into the delusions of grandeur. And these are the steps here that almost start to taint and change the subject, okay? For example, let's say, I use this as another example too. When you feed the shadow functions, when you do things outside of your normal, when you're living unhealthy, and you start reaching for things that are unhealthy pleasures for your soul, unhealthy for your psyche, it's almost like I said, I used this example before, like drinking oil. Instead of quenching your thirst with water, which would quench your thirst, you're drinking oil, which actually makes you thirstier, you see? So you're thinking it goes down like water, it satisfies with water, but it makes you thirstier. So then you need more and more water to drink. Now this is the trap, well, this is part of the trap of the Messiah complex, is the fact that now the grandeur takes over, the admiration and the praise starts taking over, so they need more and more of it in order to sustain their ego. They need more and more of it as they grow into this Messiah complex. And in a sense, they're becoming a monster, an egotistical monster. Now, right away, that should tell you that there's figures in our world history that we could cite back to. And there's some glaring examples of this in world history. Certain dictatorships, certain fascist regimes over history where we see subjects turn this way. Okay? And at this point here, the admiration becomes tyranny. Okay? So something changes. So no longer is it praise and admiration. No longer is it just, basically saluting and congratulating and spreading gifts and being respectful. It turns into something else. No longer is that enough. No longer is that enough for this type of ego. So what it has to be is that it has to be actually, no longer is it praise, turns into misery for those who are praising. In other words, they have to actually inflict a sense of tyranny, a sense of control, either by controlling by starvation, maybe controlling the monetization, controlling the flow of food. We're talking about in like let's say a fascist regime, controlling the flow of food, things like that. Maybe inflicting harsh, brutal punishments for even smaller, lesser crimes and things like that, and actually enjoying the fact that people are being that are suffering under your command, suffering because of your command, things like that. So this is when the admiration becomes tyranny. So like I said, it's like drinking the oil and drinking it. Now you're drinking so much. No longer is it just oil and admiration. It has to turn into brutality in order to get the same type of fix, almost, to feed the same hunger of the ego because of tyrant. Okay, and that's basically, that was my last point. Tyranny equals brutality. Okay, that's the final. That's usually the final stage. At this point here, the tyrant is a complete monster, completely a monster, basically built. Now we can see examples of that. We can see slow erosions of governments take over the course of hundreds of years. Having fair and safe elections usually takes that out of there, but that's beside the point. But anyway, these are the stages of the Messiah complex. And typically you can actually see this in, let's say, a rock star. A lot of times you see just simple rock stars that get the same admiration from the fans of their audience. I mean, the fans that adore them in the audience. And they basically send them letters. They're worshipped in a way. They have groupies and roadies that are constantly praising them. And you can see some of the lifestyle that they turn to. They have to turn into almost decadence. Pretty soon it actually becomes almost that lust for admiration, that lust for grandeur, which becomes brutal, actually becomes almost needed in, like, let's say, perverse sexual addictions as well. I hope I can say that on YouTube, but that's about as much as I'm going to say. So usually what it is, it's a transmogrification of the mind as these tyrants get deeper and deeper into their delusions of grandeur. And usually it ends up being, it never ends up very well. Usually the tyrant gets so bloated and so overindulged that usually things happen. You know, like certain, let's just say some cancers, and they may develop certain addictions to drugs and narcotics and things like that usually are detriment to their body, detrimental to their whole psyche, and usually they don't last very long once they go down to that dark side as they cross. Okay, well, I hope I explained that one. Now I'm going to explain another one called the Messiah complex trap. Okay, now this is basically the same thing. You're putting somebody on a pedestal. You're putting somebody with praise and admiration on a pedestal, and you're feeding their ego into their shadow functions. You're basically doing the same thing, but at this point here, this is all by design, by the worshiper, by the admirer. Okay, now think about this. This is actually very maniacal, and this actually goes deeper. No longer is the admirer and the one that does the worshiping just being blindly worshiping because they want something to, they need something to aggrandizement. They need something that's feeding their ego, so they're supporting this. Okay, this is a diabolical one where the one during the worship actually stoops to conquer. In other words, okay, in other words, a lot of times, honestly, the only best way I can explain this is through a domestic relationship. Typically, you might get, let's say, the female. Now, this could be a female that is narcissistic and could be sociopathic. Okay, usually puts on a good front. Now, people, I'm not picking on women here. I just want you to know this is an example of how this works. All right, but typically, they may put a man on a pedestal. At first, they may put them on, they may praise them, they may, compliment them, praise them on how they are, and just put them on that pedestal, and maybe reward them with intimacy and things like that. And at that point, it's they indulge the ego with seduction. Now, seduction and stooping to conquer becomes kind of almost like a modus operandi for this type of person, this type of woman, let's say. Okay, and at this point here, the man's weakened. His spirit weakens through being over demand and critical. All of a sudden, the demands get stronger after she's pretty much, made a man, let's say, addicted to pleasure, addicted to her intimacy, let's say, her bedroom intimacy and things like that. She may become overly critical and demanding and things like that. Well, after all, like I said, this is a narcissistic trait. This is also that very, like I said, the maniacal trait that comes out at this point. And this is what they're going on. Now, this is all by demand. This was almost like a bait and switch in a sense, of an elaborate scheme of a trap, of a bait and switch, where now all of a sudden the man is already in too deep. Yeah, he accepted it. He accepted the praise, the stoop to conquer. Then all of a sudden he became full of himself, became full of her. But all of a sudden she changed and became overly demanding and critical. And all of a sudden, he becomes weakened. A man's soul becomes weakened at this point because now he's being overly, He's actually bit the forbidden fruit in a sense. He's taken the forbidden fruit. He's indulged in that fruit that she has provided, that she has given right along. Now he begins weakened. He begins to weaken. And all of a sudden, she takes over. She becomes the over-domineering wife. Okay. I know I'm going to anger a few feminists out there. I know I'm not trying to anger, I'm just using this as an example, because a lot of these types of women, these kinds of women, instinctively know how to do this. This is instinctive. Now, these tactics are actually used in these puppet government regimes. Let's say now you have a situation where you have a puppet dictator, okay? You do the same thing. The same kind of strategies are used. They stoop to conquer. They use the same kind of aggrandizement. They make this guy believe that he's in charge of things, but in reality, that they're just doing things behind his back and pulling his strings, basically, with the same tactics that I just issued. Now, this is on a grander scale, okay? So that was the Messiah complex trap. So basically, somebody's behind the scenes or pulling the strings, and the guy in front there is just being pulled by the puppet master. I know that might be a little deep. I hope I explained this whole thing, but this is a psychology that's it's out there. It's readily available. Again, I hope my style of presenting this is working for you people. But that's basically what it is. That is the Messiah complex and the trap wrapped into one, in a sense. Well, people, I hope you enjoy these psychology lessons, all right? And please give me some thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and leave some comments below. Let me know if you kind of like this. And if there's anything you can add to this theory that I just said, then feel free. Now, believe me, people, this is not my necessary assessment. I believe that these are theories that have been passed on. This is not anything that I personally came up with. I'm aware of this, and I'm expounding this knowledge to you. Is just a way of understanding these psychological traits that we're able to. Usually, INFJs were fascinated with this kind of thing as well, and that's what this channel is. This is to enrich us with and educate us and enlighten us about many different topics that basically we're interested in. Okay, well, people, thank you so much, and remember. So, oh my gosh, I'm losing my train of thought. So people, thank you so much, and until the next time, have yourself a wonderful rest of your day.